I carried brownies to the neighbor my husband can't stand, knocked, and crossed a line that made our whole house feel smaller. What began as anger and a need to feel seen turned into a secret that rewired my marriage. Now I have to choose between staying silent or telling a truth that could break us. And the twist behind that door still shocks me. Before I dive into all the details of my story, don't forget to subscribe if you love hearing unforgettable life experiences. One afternoon, I carried a plate of brownies to the door of the neighbor my husband can't stand, and I told myself it was just an olive branch. The knock sounded ordinary. The choice that followed was not. What happened behind that door didn't start with touch. It started with anger and a hunger to feel anything but small. I crossed a line that changed the shape of my home long before anyone else could see it. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe and stay with me. I'm going to tell you exactly how a small kindness turned into the worst decision I've made. I'm 33. He's 35, and we've been married long enough to know where the floorboards creak. We have 3 daughters, school calendars on the fridge, and a new address we bought in the optimism of spring. Next door lives a man I'll call Jay, older than me, mid-40s. A uniform hanging on a hook by his door and a frown that feels permanent. From the first week, he seemed determined to police more than the street, how our recycling bins faced, where my husband parked, whether our grass measured up. Each complaint arrived like a tiny summons. Each one chipped at the easy way my husband and I used to breathe. If I'm honest, our intimacy had dimmed before we met Jay. The pandemic taught us both new kinds of tired. My husband started a medication that made his body slow to answer when mine asked. We tried to pretend the room hadn't changed, but it had light that used to be warm turned to a cooler shade. We did the kind of love that looks good on paper, shared chores, inside jokes, teamwork. But the spark felt like a pilot light that needed wind, and the house stayed sealed. There's a shame in saying this out loud, but I need to say it. Watching Jay push my husband around did something ugly to me. I saw the man I promised to stand beside soften to avoid a fight, and instead of admiring his restraint, I resented it. My anger didn't explode. It fermented. I started waking up with a bitterness that had no place to go. When I pictured Jay, I pictured an answer to a question I hadn't asked honestly. Do I want to be held, or do I want to feel powerful? Sometimes desire isn't about heat. It's about control. Jay wasn't charming. He was blunt and bored and alone. Twice divorced, according to the driveway gossip I pretended not to hear. There's a way some men carry themselves that reads as unyielding, and I convinced myself unyielding would feel like safety. That's the headspace I was in the day I baked brownies with my girls and decided to deliver them next door. I wore a red summer dress because it made me feel like the brighter version of myself I hadn't seen in months. I told myself I was trying to make peace with someone who made our days harder. But underneath that sentence was another. I wanted to be seen in a way that had nothing to do with grocery lists or school pickups. The sun hit the driveway, and it felt like crossing a small river. Jay opened the door and let me in with the kind of shrug that says whatever. His kitchen smelled like coffee and last night's air. I set the plate down and said something neighborly. He asked what I really wanted. I could pretend we danced around it, but the truth is that some doors don't creak, they click. We stood there, 2 adults who knew exactly how far the houses were from each other and how much trouble we were inviting. Consent was spoken and unspoken, quick and plain. And then the city outside went quiet. This is where the details could turn explicit. I won't do that, not because it didn't happen, but because the mechanics are not the story. My choices are. The curtains might as well have closed themselves. The room drew smaller. Distance disappeared. Breath found a rhythm that had nothing to do with words. When a person is starving, even crumbs feel like a feast. I told myself this was hunger finding relief. It was really anger finding a proxy, When it was over, the world did the cruel thing it always does. It kept moving as if nothing had shifted. I walked back across the same driveway with an empty plate and a heart that didn't know where to stand. My daughters asked if the neighbor liked the brownies. I smiled with a mouth that didn't feel like mine and said yes. That night, when my husband came home, I was almost gentle enough to convince myself I'd done nothing wrong. If the story ended there, maybe I could have boxed it as a single lapse, labeled it with the weather and the date, and hidden it in a high closet. It didn't end there. Jaden softened toward my husband. If anything, his petty power grew sharper, as if being let into our privacy gave him permission to make the street smaller. And because I had crossed that line once, my mind found reasons to cross it again. The second time was easier than the first. The third time didn't even require a reason. I told myself I was finding a part of me I'd lost. I was really losing parts I couldn't get back. Here's the first cliff. I didn't see until I was already over it. I started measuring my husband against a moment he hadn't participated in. I compared his quiet kindness to Jay's blunt certainty and called the first weakness and the second strength. I forgot what kindness costs to build and how little certainty requires to exist. I watched my husband shoulder the small humiliations of our street because he wanted peace for our kids, and I translated that as not man enough, a sentence I'm ashamed to admit ever lived in my head. I'd love to tell you I confessed immediately, that I understood secrecy is corrosive and ripped the bandage off. Instead, I tried to live two stories at once. In one, I folded laundry and asked about my husband's day. In the other, I waited for the porch light next door to click on. Living like that is like trying to walk while carrying a glass of water to the brim. Every step spills. There were close calls, a text at a bad time, a comment from Jay over the fence that my husband didn't catch, but I did. The kind of private tone dressed up as public sarcasm. My heart learned a new pace, a rabbit's. I started sleeping badly, which meant I started snapping at small things, which meant the house heard more sighs than laughter. If you've ever kept a secret you hate, you know the sound it makes, a faint humming that never turns off. Midway through this mess, something happened that should have been my second cliff. My youngest asked me why the neighbor didn't smile at Dad, not why the neighbor didn't smile at us, why he didn't smile at Dad. Kids notice what we hope they'll miss. My stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down. I told her some adults are grumpy because they don't know where to put their worry. Then I went to the bathroom, turned on the sink so no one would hear me, and stared at the face of a woman I didn't recognize. You might be wondering why I'm telling you this here instead of to my husband first. That's fair. Part of the answer is that I needed to hear my own words out loud in a place where the repercussions weren't immediate, where I couldn't edit them to make myself look better. Part of the answer is fear, the ordinary kind that makes people delay what must be done until the next sunrise, and then the next. If you're still listening, this is where I ask you to subscribe and stay. Not because I want applause, because accountability is easier when you know someone will ask for the next chapter. I kept seeing Jay for a while after that, which is the simplest and most damning sentence I can write. The meetings were quick and designed not to leave traces. The intimacy was not intimate. It was an exchange. I thought of it as a private rebellion against the life that had made me invisible. In truth, I was making myself invisible to the people who loved me most. Here's the turn. One evening, my husband came home earlier than usual. He'd had a rough day, worse than the average bad, and he sat at our table, with his shoulders rounded in a way that made him look like the boy he once was. He told me about a coworker who had said something sharp, about a parent-teacher meeting that didn't go right, about feeling like he couldn't get traction anywhere. I reached for his hand and felt a shock of recognition. This was the man I had promised to love. Not the version I wished him into. Not the version I punished him for not being the actual, complicated, decent person in front of me. The room did that trick where it shifts back into focus after you've been looking at the wrong thing. That night, we went to bed early and didn't pretend anything we weren't. We lay there back to back at first. Not hostile, just careful. Then we turned toward each other and I said, "I miss us." He said, "Me too," and looked like he didn't trust the sentence to hold. We talked about the medication and how it made him feel like a stranger in his own skin. We talked about how our attempts at closeness had started to feel like tests we both failed. We cried a little, which wasn't dramatic, just human. We agreed to see a doctor and a therapist, not to perform a miracle, but to see what could be built with better tools. If this were a tidy movie, that conversation would have cured me. It didn't. It gave me a mirror I could stop avoiding. The next morning, I looked into it and said it out loud. I am going to stop. Not I should. Not I want to. But I am. Stopping wasn't a single act. It was a series of inconvenient choices made over and over. Not answering a message, not walking next door when the house was empty, not letting my anger justify what my vows forbid. I blocked Jay's number. When he caught me on the sidewalk and let his voice dip into that private tone, I said, "It's over," in a voice I made steady with both hands. He rolled his eyes like a teenager and made a comment about how some people can't keep fun straight. I kept walking. Do I owe my husband the full truth? Yes, the answer is yes. I wish I could say I told him the next day. I didn't. I told a therapist first. I needed to put the entire story on a table where it could be examined without either of us packing it back into the box labeled denial. I cried like I was draining something old and sour from a wound. The therapist didn't absolve me. She asked me what problem I thought I was solving when I knocked on Jay's door. I said I wanted to feel like I mattered. She said, "Affairs don't give you value. They rent it to you and overcharge." I wrote that down. The plan now is simple and terrifying. I'm telling my husband this week. Not in the shadow of an argument, not as a grenade, but as the truth he deserves in the calm of our living room with our phones face down. I have already called a couples counselor whose name came recommended by our doctor. I have rehearsed the wrong ways to say it, ways that make me look noble, ways that blame my hunger on his medication or Jay's aggression. I am practicing the right way. I did this. I am sorry. I am ending it. I want to repair what I broke, if you are willing. If you're halfway through this and angry at me, you're not alone. I'm angry at me too. You might also be someone who has sat in a quiet house and made a choice you didn't recognize yourself in. If that's you, I won't offer you a loophole. I'll offer you a hand to stand up and do the next honest thing. I keep thinking about the metaphors that carried me. Doors, keys, distance closing, rooms shrinking. Here's the one I'm trying to live by now: light. You don't fix a dark room by rearranging the furniture. You turn on a light and make a plan for what needs moving. Before I close, I want to ask you a few things because your answers help people like me step toward the harder, better path. Would you want the full truth if you were in my husband's place? Or would you ask for only what you needed to move forward? If you were me, would you tell before or after couples therapy begins? What would rebuilding look like in a situation where the neighbor remains difficult and the street still small? If you believe telling the truth and ending the affair is the minimum first step, tap like. If you think there's a better sequence I haven't considered, tell me respectfully in the comments. I read them even when they hurt, because growing up means staying in the room when the hard parts arrive. And if you want to follow what happens next, how the conversation goes, whether we can draw new lines and keep them subscribed and turn on notifications so you don't miss the update. As for Jay, he will still live next door whether we sell the house or not. Bullying doesn't transform because you feed it. We're documenting his behavior properly now, not stewing in it. If we stay, we set clear boundaries and loop in the HOA and, if necessary, people who can mediate without flare-ups in the driveway. If we go because it's better for our kids, not because he gets the last word. What happens to a marriage after a betrayal depends on two people, not one. He may decide that my apology is not a bridge he wants to cross. He may need time or space, or both. He may discover he is stronger without me. I have to be brave enough to accept his decision. My job is to become a person who tells the truth, even when it empties a room. Tonight, I'll set 2 glasses on the table and ask my husband to sit. I'll say his name the way I did when we were 25 and borrowed furniture, and thought love could power through anything as long as it was loud enough. I will tell him in clear sentences how I broke what we had, and how I intend to help build what could be, if he wants to. If he doesn't, I will still be the kind of mother who teaches her daughters that you don't hide what you've done just because. Hiding is easier. When I walked across that driveway with brownies, I thought I was delivering sweetness to a bitter man. I ended up serving myself a version of power that tasted like ash. I can't unsay what I said or unchoose what I chose. I can turn toward the person I promised to be and find out if she still wants to live. Thank you for staying with me to the end. I don't expect forgiveness from strangers, and I don't ask you to make me the hero of a story that doesn't have one. I'm here to tell the truth before it tells on me. Subscribe if you want to hear what happens next, and leave a comment if you've stood at a similar door and had to decide which key to use. I'm listening.